Hello, and a huge warm welcome today to my guest, Sarah Guscott, who I'm very excited to chat to about sensory processing. But before we head into that, I just want to tell you a little more about our guest. Sarah is a dedicated educator, author, and occupational therapist with a background in both early years education and higher education. She holds two degrees, one in early childhood studies and the other in occupational therapy, as well as a master's in education, and is a fellow of Advanced HE. Her career began in early years education, and after her youngest child started school, she retrained as an occupational therapist, combining her passion for learning with her personal experience as a mum and caregiver. Now, working in higher education as a lecturer and curriculum leader, Sarah brings together academic knowledge, research informed practice, and lived insight to champion inclusive, sensory aware approaches for neurodivergent individuals. She is especially passionate about sensory processing and its power to make everyday life more manageable and meaningful for individuals and families alike. Sarah is the author of three books, including a children's story that explores sensory experiences and has written several published articles on sensory well-being, emotional regulation, and inclusive practice. She regularly contributes to research, policy discussions, and training. And outside of her professional role, Sarah enjoys volunteering in her community and through her faith is always looking for ways to support others and help people wherever she can. I'm so excited and pleased to welcome today, Sarah. How are you doing?
Hi, Lucy. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be on here today with you.
It's really lovely to have you. And what a bio. Like I was reading that, and I was like, my goodness, there's so much in there that you've achieved already and so much fantastic things that you're giving back into the community, which is amazing.
Oh, thank you, Lucy. It's been quite a journey actually when I reflect back to like over the years and you think, right, that's it. Like when I finished my first degree, I thought, right, that's it. My education's finished now. And then something else, another opportunity perhaps comes along, and then, I was back in education again. And I think, it's really true when they say that education is a lifelong
Yeah.
journey, a lifelong commitment. I think it can grip you, and when it does, it feels like there's just lots of. Well, I just feel like it will be. Maybe I'll be in education forever.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? There's always something else to do, and that once you're in, that's it. I always say that about my experience when I did my undergraduate degree and then stayed on and did my master's, and then ended up going on as a member of staff, and I'm still there now. So it's like you're never getting rid of me.
Yeah, that's it. I think there's a book for it. There's just something about it. It's probably one of the hardest things that you can do is studying, and especially like when you're a little bit older and maybe you've got other commitments, family commitments alongside.
Yeah,
It's really hard work, and but I don't know if there's anything quite as rewarding as that feeling when you finally completed it and
yeah,
like you reflect back on how much you've grown as a person and how much you've learned and the friends that you make as well. I think there's
yeah.
something quite unique about that experience.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. There is nothing like it. So let's go back and start about your journey to parenting because you are a mum. So what was your journey into parenting like?
Yeah, thanks. What a lovely question to start with, Lucy. So I'll start when I was very young. So when I was a child, one of my favourite things to do was play with my dolls. They were my
Yeah.
babies. I absolutely loved them. So whenever people would ask me, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd always say, I want to be a mum. And
Oh,
that was my ambition, I'd be playing there with my babies, having a lovely time. What do you want to be? I want to be a mum. And there was no gender stereotype in there. I've got really supportive parents that whatever
yeah,
our interests were, they would have supported. But I was drawn to these dolls, these babies. And
yeah.
so I think from a very young age, I'd got an idea in my mind of what parenting was going to be like.
Hmm.
And then and then I became a parent, and I was very young when I had my eldest son, and it was a very different experience to what I'd anticipated, I guess.
Really?
So yeah, he came early. I had gastroenteritis, which then triggered labour, and so
Oh no.
it was a really long, drawn out labour that lasted for days. I was very young, and I it's quite a daunting experience, I think, being in the hospital environment and, you know, with everything that goes on while you're there. And then
Yeah.
yeah, and thankfully he was absolutely okay, and we just had to stay in hospital for a few days, and he was absolutely fine. So, you know, I was really lucky that everything, all you know, it turned out okay. But he was a crier, Lucy. He was not a contented baby. If he wasn't asleep, and he didn't sleep often, he was crying. And so
Oh
I think
no.
my first experience of being a mum was definitely not what I anticipated would be. I was tired all the time. Um, I think you quickly learn, like, I guess all the things that I thought I would do as a parent, I think you quickly learn that you just go with whatever the baby wants, especially when you've had a
Yeah.
sleepless night. Um,
Yeah.
but I was in a lucky position where I've got a supportive network around me. So my parents are close by and my siblings, and so, you know, I was lucky in that sense that although I was young, I've got a really supportive network. And actually, my mum's a really good role model because, well, she was in early years education for 30 plus years when she retired a couple
Oh,
of years
okay.
ago. And yeah, so she was a lovely role model for me, very supportive and involved. So although it was hard work with my first, you know, I was lucky to have that support network. And then my second came along, and he was the absolute opposite. The absolute opposite to my first. He was the most placid, happy baby. Um, and actually, he didn't cry he was first born. There was just no sound. He didn't cry or anything. And I remember saying to the midwife, "Is everything okay?" Because it was a very different
Oh,
experience to the
yeah.
first time
He
around.
was more like the dolls that you were playing with growing up.
Absolutely, yeah, that's what I anticipated that things would be. And but I'll come back to, so that was my Ashton. I'll come back to him, and then we thought that was it. We didn't think we could have any more. And then an absolute blessing. I feel like she was an answer to a prayer. Our daughter came along um,
Oh.
5 years after Ashton, and she was a little whirlwind, and she still is now. So she definitely keeps us on our toes. Um, but Ashton, so he was diagnosed as being autistic when he was very young, and so he didn't hit like typical milestones that you would expect. Um,
Mm.
but it was at a time when there wasn't really much understanding in mainstream education about autism, and
Right.
they the teachers weren't trained. They not like it is now. You know, it was a very different experience, and
Mm.
so I think he did have a lot of challenges. Not because through there being any behavioural difficulties, or he struggled a lot with his sensory processing, and I mentioned that because it sort of will lead in later, I guess, in our conversation as to why I'm so passionate about it. But he's very
Yeah.
sensory, and yeah, he struggled really from the start, and I think he got missed a lot in education because he was quiet. He was non-verbal at school, and
Right.
I'll tell you one story. I can laugh about it now, but actually at the time I felt so sad for him. So I'm sure this is the same in most primary schools where they line up for assembly, perhaps first thing in the morning. This was first thing in the morning. So they all lined up for assembly, and it was a whole school assembly, and they'd all gone down to the hall, all sitting cross-legged. And there wasn't quite room for Ashton on the end of the line. And so he then had to start a new line. And then the rest of
Right.
the next class, can you imagine, the next class then joined on. So he was
Yeah.
um, one person in the next class. Anyway, they all stood up in turn at the end of the assembly and went back to wherever they were going, classroom or whatever the next activity lesson was that they were doing. Anyway, Ashton, unbeknown to him, really, he'd stood up with the wrong class. So he stood up with his line that he was sat with. He hadn't
Yeah.
noticed that the line in front had already gone, which is his class, and he'd followed then the other line just going out and walked back to his class. Now, when he went back to his class, there was no teachers there, there was no students there. He was just walked into an empty classroom, and
Oh.
Yeah, so like when he told me when he came home, but because he struggles with communication, it was something that he couldn't really verbalise. Thankfully, there was a teacher that was floating around that could see he was sort of just pacing around the classroom on his own, and had asked, where should you be? And he didn't know. He just assumed that everyone was going back to the
Mm.
class, but they'd gone straight on to PE, so they were in the hall, and he
Oh, I
managed to do a bit
see.
of detective work. Um,
Oh,
but that's just like one small example, I guess, of how he went under the radar. He went
yeah,
um unnoticed, I guess. And he was supposed to have a statement of education, it was back then. Um
yeah.
and the process, the school, for whatever reason, didn't do all the documentation that they needed to do. So then when things moved over to the HCP, the Education Healthcare Plan, that process didn't happen for him. And so I think that a lot of opportunities were missed. There was a lot of missed opportunities. And I guess I understand from an education perspective, I've been in early years, I've been in primary education, I know how busy things can get, and I know what it's like within those environments. But then I guess with my mum hat on and being an advocate
Mm,
for anyone that's autistic, you do have to fight a little bit, which can be tiring,
hmm.
especially when you're emotionally involved. Like from a parent perspective, it can be hard work and it can be tiring.
Oh, absolutely. So I completely see where you're coming from, and it's really hard, isn't it, when you are you do have a foot in multiple camps that all feed into one thing with your child, and I remember. This is my daughter's autistic, and I remember when she was in school, because she's finished school now. But when she was in school, she really struggled, not academically, but it was all those kind of overwhelm of sensory elements of school, the social interactions, the emotional regulation, and all of those types of things was where her struggle was, not the typical kind of academic struggles. So she very much fell under the radar as well, because on a surface level and a performance level she's doing
Yeah.
fine, like
Yeah.
there's no issues here, but actually the exhaustion that she was suffering and the frustration of not being able to experience school from a sensory and emotional regulation perspective was really tough on her.
Yeah, and absolutely. It's hard, isn't it, Lucy? Because these are the children that are in mainstream school because they are academically able, because they can
Mm,
perform and they can sit the standardized tests, and the results are there. But actually what sometimes gets missed um is the fact that the sensory processing aspect has a massive impact on learning engagement, on learners'
mhm.
achievements. So if we think about it, what results could come if we're providing a sensory environment that is
Yes,
supportive of those needs. Can you imagine like
yeah,
what that would
absolutely.
look like? And I guess that's where
Yeah.
my passion comes in, because it's not the children, it's not the people that we need to change at all. That, in my eyes,
Hmm.
Ashton's perfect as he is. It's the environment, and it's the
Yeah.
environment that we need to work on to make it so that it is accessible, that it is
Hmm.
supportive, and that it does help everybody to be able to achieve their full potential. There shouldn't be any barriers to learning, and that comes with, that includes, I guess, that sensory aspect as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And you're right. I very much agree with you in terms of it being the environment and the importance that the environment plays on that. And just using my daughter as an example, because that's my lived experience. And, she struggled in school from that aspect, not kind of academically, but I then deregistered her from school at the age of 14, and she was home educated.
Yeah,
And then she did 14 to 16 provision. She did an apprenticeship and is now in full-time employment. And she's now set up her own business and is thriving because
amazing.
I've been able to provide a different environment
Yeah,
around her, so that actually she knows what things that she struggles with. She knows elements of things that create a challenge for her, and she's able, in most cases, to mitigate that and be able to put herself in different situations so she can thrive. Obviously, there are elements that she doesn't have control over, and I can tell on those days when she comes home from work and it's been, the lights have been very bright and it's been incredibly busy and she's felt hot and it's taken its toll on her. But in that kind of learning environment, when she was at school, when she came out and she was learning from home, the difference in her just everyday demeanor was completely different because we changed that environment.
Yeah,
And I'm very aware that of the privileged position that I was in, that I worked from home and I was able to facilitate that. Not everyone can do that. So of course there definitely needs to be more in terms of what can we do to help the environment in school and things like that. But it definitely does highlight those issues and how important the environment is.
absolutely, absolutely. And how lucky um, that you were able to facilitate that environment. And look what she's been able to
Yeah.
achieve, you know, and she's still young. So, you know, she's
Hmm.
still got lots of years of career and life and, you know, adventure ahead. And what a wonderful experience that you were able to have that together and she could see the difference in environment and the impact that that then has. So she experienced from,
Yeah.
you know, what it's like in school and the impact that the environment has, but then also study and learning and being educated, but an environment where she could thrive and she could achieve, you know, that what a wonderful thing that, well, I guess you were all able to experience. And it just highlights
Yeah.
again the importance of the environment helping us to thrive and not impacting us so that we're in this constant state of either overstimulated or understimulated and we can't regulate, you know, our sensory systems.
Mm. Mm. So we've mentioned a few times about sensory processing. So we should probably, for anyone who's new to the concept, we should probably explain what sensory processing actually is and why it matters to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So this is something that I hopefully won't waffle on a tangent too much. um, okay, so if you imagine to start with, we've got a ladder. Can you
Okay.
visualize just a ladder, and then in the middle is the optimal zone. So that's where you're feeling calm, you're feeling alert. That's sort of like the optimum place that we want to be. That's the middle rung of the ladder. So you've got some sensory input, but you're not at the point where you're overwhelmed. Okay. I will go back and
Okay.
explain all the sensory systems, but this hopefully will be just a starting point with a bit of a visual. Then on the
Okay.
bottom rung, so the very first rung of the ladder is where you're understimulated. So you're sluggish and tired. You probably would be there first thing in the morning when you're first waking up. Um, so that's understimulated. And then the very top rung of the ladder is where you're overstimulated, where you can be panicked, overwhelmed, anxious. Okay. So
Okay.
that's the ladder that I'll refer back to. But our sensory processing is, so we all process, so I should start with this. We all process sensory information, okay? Everybody processes sensory information from our environment. So we will
Hmm.
talk about sensory processing differences, which is often linked to neurodivergence, you know, somebody that's perhaps autistic or has ADHD. But that doesn't mean to say that you can only have sensory processing differences if you've got a neurodivergence. That's not the case because if we remember,
Okay.
everybody processes sensory information. Now, it becomes a difficulty when it's stopping you from being able to do what you want to do in life, do those everyday activities. So, for example, when I go outside, I have to have my sunglasses on, no matter sort of whether it's really bright or a little bit dull. For some reason, it feels uncomfortable when I go outside, so I'll just put my glasses on. Now, that's not stopping me from being able to do something. I can still go outside and access, you know, the environment, the community. I'll just put my glasses on.
Yeah.
Now, my Ashton, when he goes outside, he hates to wear sunglasses. He won't ever put them on. So he's processing that visual information differently to me. But again, it's not stopping him from being able to access the community. So it's something that's not stopping us, but we're processing it differently. Okay. So
Hmm.
we all
Okay.
process sensory information, but some of us will process it differently. It becomes a difficulty when it's stopping us from being able to do something. So we have our five external sensory systems, which are things that possibly we all know about. So that's our touch, taste, smell, sight, sound. Um,
Hmm.
which we taught about from a very young age, really. But then we also have our three internal sensory systems. Now, these are systems that potentially are lesser known. But I personally feel these are the things that can have the biggest impact. So we have our interoceptive system. Now, this is how it recognises when we're hungry, when we're thirsty, when we're feeling too hot, or when we're feeling too cold, or we need to go to the toilet. That sensory system, it will send a signal to our brain to say, you're too hot, you perhaps should take a jacket off or take your
Yeah.
jumper off. Now, these signals that are getting sent, we're not thinking about it. It's not something that we're consciously thinking about. It's something that happens without it happens unconsciously. It's not something that we're necessarily thinking about. Okay.
Hmm.
We also then have our vestibular system. Now, this is to do with our balance and coordination. So it's located within our inner ear, and it detects movement and motion in our head. It helps us to maintain balance. So if we think about when we're walking outside, we might be walking on a hard ground, and then it might then change to soft grass. Our vestibular system will very quickly kick in and let our brain know that we need to change our movement because we've gone from something hard to something soft.
Right. Okay.
So again, it's not something that we're consciously thinking about, it will just naturally kick in. Now, in this
Hmm.
instance, somebody that might have a difficulty there might appear to be quite clumsy, and they might seem to almost trip up their own feet. And it could be that that signal that's being sent to the brain is not quite getting sent either quickly enough or loud enough for our brain to
Hmm.
then send a response signal out to say, you need to correct the way that you're walking.
Right.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like me as well. That's completely. I definitely struggle on that front. I can be quite clumsy, but I definitely struggle with changing in like surroundings and even like spatial awareness. I don't know if this is spatial awareness or if it's going to be the next one that you talk about. But that I'm not very good spatially.
Yeah, so actually that leads me straight into our proprioceptive system, which is exactly that.
Yeah.
That's to do with knowing where our body is in space. So, for example, if I
Yeah.
was to close my eyes and touch my nose, I would know where my body is, so I'd be able to touch my nose without necessarily looking at my hand. It helps us to be able to navigate stairs without necessarily looking at our feet, because our body can sort of sense where our foot is without looking at it. Our proprioceptive system also helps us control force and pressure. So if you think about when we're needing to write something, then it will send that signal to say
Right.
you need to hold it as this tight or a bit looser, and again, it's happening without us even thinking about it. So sometimes
Yeah.
we might find that children really struggle with toileting, for example, and that could possibly be because of their interoceptive system. So the signal is perhaps not getting sent
Hmm.
as strongly as it should, or it might be, getting sent too loudly, and then they might feel the urge to go more often. But
Yeah.
also, if they're having difficulties with their proprioceptive system and they can't quite grasp like how firm to hold something, if we think about then when we're in the bathroom and we need to then grab some toilet roll, and then if the hand goes behind our back, we can't then see what our hand is doing. So you can see this then becomes a bit of a difficulty. And then if you add on to
Okay.
that,
Yeah.
if their feet aren't firmly on the ground and their feet are sort of floating, if they're having difficulties knowing where their body is anyway, there's no feedback there to say that this is where your body is. So they're sort of
Yeah.
almost, it could feel quite an anxiety provoking experience, because actually if they can't see what their hand is doing unless they're looking at it, they don't really know how heavy or loose to grip something, and then their feet are dangling, you can see how all these different
Mm.
experiences and the signals that are getting sent to the brain can then create that anxiety, that overstimulation. So then if we go back to the ladder experience, they're in that top rung of the ladder. So we want them to
Yeah.
ideally be in the middle, where they're feeling calm and alert. But that one experience of going from maybe even having a bit of an accident, not being able to perhaps make it to the toilet in time because the signal hasn't been sent as strong, then
Yeah.
the whole toileting experience can be quite an anxiety provoking thing. So if we think about our children when they're in the school environment, That's just such a small portion of their whole day when they just need to nip to the toilet. So
Yeah.
already that potentially has created an experience where they're in that overstimulated, anxiety, overwhelm place. And then if they're then expected to come back to the classroom and sit on the carpet because they're doing something where they really need to concentrate, we need movement when we're
Mm.
feeling anxious, because if we think back to our caveman ancestors, their fight, flight, or freeze needed to kick in purely to protect them. You know, they needed to be protected from any predators that were around. So naturally, what
Yeah.
happens is our muscles warm up. We might get a bit clammy, a bit sweaty. We get a bit hotter because your muscles are getting ready to move because they've either got to run or you've got to fight. So if you think about that situation where this child has perhaps come back to the carpet, they're overstimulated, they might be feeling too hot, a bit sweaty, they might be fidgeting and moving, and because their muscles are seeking that feedback. So then you might then see a behaviour response, and the teachers possibly might not understand that actually that response has come potentially from that toileting experience, because if they think about the situation
Yeah.
maybe before, it might create that, oh wow, what's just happened here? That's come from
Yeah.
nowhere, when in actual fact behaviour always comes from somewhere. It's always a form of communication,
Yeah, absolutely.
which seems like a nothing moment in the day, but that it can have a big impact for that child in that moment.
You don't even think about it, do you? Like, obviously, I've got some knowledge around this, and I thought that I kind of understood all of that process. But just you explaining it there just goes to show how complex the most simple task could be in terms of how someone is experiencing it. And I think in a kind of educational setting, how important is it that teachers are aware of this?
Oh, I think it's one of the most important things that we can teach. And obviously, I'm saying that because I'm biased and I absolutely love sensory processing. So I'll just tell you this quick story. So although I've been in early years in education and I did my degree in early years in education, so I've got a lot of knowledge, I guess. I think when you're emotionally invested in something, it almost puts the blinkers on. And so thinking about Ashton when he got his diagnosis of being autistic, I felt panicked, that uncertainty of no, how am I going to help? How am I going to help him? There's lots of uncertainties of, is he going to be able to live a life typically to his peers, his siblings even? Is he going to be able to be independent and hold a job? And, all these sorts of things are going through
Yeah.
your mind in just that split second of when you hear that. And I felt overwhelmed and I felt helpless to know how I was going to help my Ashton.
Mm.
Um, and that was with all the knowledge and understanding that I guess I had at that point. Now, when I went and decided to study to become an occupational therapist, I was introduced to sensory processing then, and at that moment, so this was a lot of years later. I didn't always feel helpless, but this was a lot of years later. In that moment where they were explaining about sensory processing and I learned more about it, and then I came away and I did some of my own research, it was almost like this moment where I was like, um, this is it. This is how I'm going to be able to best help Ashton. This is how I'm going to be able to best support him to be able to get the most that he can out of his experiences in life. And I think from that moment, I just felt this calm and this peace and this excitement almost, that actually everything's going to
Oh,
be okay. Like, things are going to
yeah.
be okay. There are things that can help. There are things that can make life a little bit easier, because life can feel challenging, it can feel hard work, but there are things out there that can help and can make those experiences, everyday experiences that I guess we can sometimes take for granted, there are things that can make that a little bit easier. And so it's something that I am absolutely passionate about, and I think for educators and for teachers and for those working um, in those environments, I think it's something that's so important, because it can have such a big impact on um, those children's day. Those
Yeah.
everyday moments build up to be something quite big to when they leave school. So those everyday, seemingly innocent moments. So that example with that child going to the toilet, feeling really dysregulated, the teacher could quite easily just dismiss that as being a nothing thing. But to that child, that's cemented a memory and an experience. And those
Yeah.
everyday memories and experiences are being built up, they're being cemented, so that when they then become an adult, they might then be struggling with their mental health and finding things overwhelming and really struggling. And it can feel almost like it's come from nowhere, but actually it's those
Mm-hmm.
everyday moments, those things that have built up over time that can have that big impact. And so I think teachers have a lot of responsibility. You know, there is a lot of responsibility. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of pressures. They have large class sizes and there's lots of demands. But if they can just have some understanding of sensory processing and how it can present why the child might be feeling anxious or why they might be understimulated even. You know, you're trying to get somebody to complete a task and why might they just seem really sluggish or just really disengaged.
Yeah.
If they can apply a sensory processing lens to that, it might then impact on the way that they then interact with that child or the way they then support that child, which then again that can have a positive impact on that child, which creates those positive memories and cements that positive environmental impact. So
Yeah.
in my mind it's probably one of the most important things that trainee teachers, early years staff can learn about.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's really hard, isn't it? Because teachers have so much responsibility. Like you said, they've got so many things they say that they need to do, so many tasks, so many, elements to their job. And especially when it comes to kind of teacher training as well, so much to learn. So it's just another thing that they need to be taken into consideration. But it's hard. It's hard to manage something like that with multiple different elements thrown in that you have to juggle for quite large classroom sizes. But it would be great to see it become more of a kind of an embedded thing in a school environment, that it's just something that's constantly addressed and constantly developing throughout the workforce, not just as part of your initial training, but just constantly throughout the year, throughout the term, and that reflection process, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think it's something that could be embedded within their CPD. You know, we know that all educators have to do a certain amount of CPD. Everybody's not going to feel as passionate about it as I do, you know, and they're obviously going to have their own their own things that they feel passionate and strongly about. But I absolutely agree. If this is something that can just be embedded and refreshed, you know, it's not something that you learn once and then that's it. It's something that
Yeah.
you're constantly learning about, and you know, new things come about and I find interesting all the time. You know, new
Yeah.
experiences I'm introduced to, or new concepts, and I'm like, oh yes, that's why. You know,
Hmm.
and it's those constant light
Hmm.
bulb moments. And I think if they, you know, if we can get the buy-in from those that are in charge, that if we can get them passionate about it, then I think that can filter through can have and definitely have an impact. I think if we can all appreciate and understand more around sensory processes and the fact that we all process sensory information, again, I think that can have an impact on staff morale and on their own mental health and well-being, because we know that trauma has an impact on our sensory systems. We know that the menopause can have an impact on the way that we process sensory information. And so, you know, there's going to be staff members out there that have been through, you know, really challenging times. They might have gone through a divorce or a bereavement, or we know the cost of living is still high, you know, and
Yeah.
so there are life experiences that happen that have an impact on our sensory systems. And so I think if they can understand it for themselves and learn about their own sensory profile and the things that impact them, that, you know, going back to the ladder, that maybe take them from being in that optimal zone to being overstimulated or even understimulated, if they can understand that about themselves, then it will make it easier, or even they might be more likely, I guess, to engage in how they can support those the children, the children that are in their care
Yeah.
around supporting their sensory processing needs.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes complete sense. So, what are some of the common misconceptions about neurodivergent individuals when it comes to sensory experiences?
Yeah, again, really good question. So there's quite a few that I've had over over the many years, and actually none of them I agree with at all. But they've just been oversensitive. That's quite a common
Yeah.
one. So it can be just dismissed. They've just been oversensitive. And actually, I can remember myself, but I can't remember the reason. My mum taking me to see the GP, and I can't remember why, but I can just remember. So I was very young. I can just remember the GP saying to my mum, "She's just been oversensitive. She just needs a bit of TLC."
No.
And that stuck with me. And I always felt
Yeah.
like that oversensitive child. I always felt like, oh, I'm just being oversensitive. And that resonated with me. And maybe that's why I remembered it, because I always felt
Yeah.
overly sensitive. And maybe that's why I feel so passionate about it as well, because sensory processing resonates with me. There's lots of areas that I can see where I'm overstimulated, or I could be understimulated, or I can signals are getting sent too loud or too quietly, and I can put myself
Mm.
in that situation, um well, daily, where I can see how the environment impacts on my own sensory systems. So that one does resonate with me, because I guess because of that experience. Hopefully GPs have learned a lot since then, because that was a very long time ago.
I don't know.
Wow, yeah. Okay, another one is sensory issues are the same for everyone, and that's
Yeah.
not the case. People could possibly be overstimulated. They quite possibly might be sensitive to sound or lighting, and that might be, a common um, thing that you might have in with a common thing that you've got with somebody else. But actually, we all experience sensory processing differently, so we can't really say, oh, it's the same for everyone, because that's not the case.
Yeah.
They'll grow out of it. That's another one. They'll grow out of it. How many times have I heard that? He'll grow out of it. And actually, some individuals do develop coping strategies. So they might appear to be more regulated, perhaps more in that middle rung of the ladder more often.
Mm.
But that's often because of learned behaviours, and not because it's something that they've grown out of.
Yeah.
And they're having a tantrum. They're just having a tantrum, when actually it could be a sensory overload. It could be that they're trying to cope with this overstimulating environment, and so they're presenting in the only way they know how, with just either screaming or shouting or kicking. And if we think back to the muscles needing to move if they're getting too hot, so if they're in that anxious state, um having a tantrum, kicking your legs, punching out, it's not an acceptable behaviour to see, but you can understand why it's happening. And it definitely doesn't fall under they're just having a tantrum if they're experiencing
Yeah.
that sensory overload. They're just trying to be difficult. They're avoiding those sensory experiences because they're just trying to be difficult. And
Yeah.
again, that's not the case. It could be that it's a coping mechanism. It could be that it's an effort to maintain comfort or function. Um, so my daughter is sensory sensitive, and she has to wear these noise cancelling headphones when we're eating the dinner at dinner time. I like everyone to all sit and have a meal together, especially now the boys are
Yeah.
older. They're both adults now. And so it's perhaps the only time that I'll get to see everybody in the day. So I try, if I can, and have it so that everybody all sits around the dinner table together. Now that in itself
Yeah.
creates an absolute sensory overwhelm, because if you think about the smells and the busyness of it all, and then the eating itself, it can be
Yeah.
quite an experience. But for her, the way that she copes is by wearing these in-ear plugs. Now, she likes to be involved in everything. She doesn't want to miss out on anything. And sometimes her older brother just say, just take them out. I'm not talking to you when you've got those in. And that,
Yeah.
he's 21 now, so he should know better. And so we do often have those conversations where I do say to him, look, there's the reason, you understand there is a reason why she's not trying to be difficult. Going back to that,
Mm.
misconception, it is
Mm.
because of this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason. And he does always go back and then have a word with her and apologise. But again, that's in a family dynamic where he does understand about sensory processing, but it's a flippant
Yeah.
comment that can be made that actually is definitely not true.
You get that a lot in society, don't you? And it's not knowing. It comes back to that knowledge as well, doesn't it, around it? Because if you aren't aware of it, you don't experience it in your own lived experience. It's not something that you come across. So, you can almost understand why people would misunderstand if you're just seeing what's happening on the surface. But there does need to be more of a generalized understanding of what happens underneath the surface, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, that's why if we can just raise awareness for everybody to understand about sensory processing and their own sensory, how they process sensory information, um, and raise that awareness and that understanding, hopefully that can combat some of those misconceptions.
Yeah, definitely. So, how can educators or caregivers, within the home, create more sensory friendly environments, both at home and in schools?
Fantastic question. And this is, again, something that I'm really passionate about and advocating for change, I guess. The first step I would always say is about understanding your own sensory processing. Understand
Mm,
how, what triggers you, that takes you from that middle rung of the ladder to being overstimulated. Learn about yourself and how you prefer to communicate, how you prefer to to work. Understanding your own sensory processing, I would say, is the first step. Then I would then go in with modifying the physical environment, so the things that you can change, thinking about the lighting, thinking about sound, thinking about seating. Often that's something that is it is definitely underrated. The seating can have a massive
mm,
impact. If we've got a child that is appears to be constantly fidgeting and can't sit still, they're telling you something. That action, that
yeah.
behaviour is telling you that they're seeking feedback. They need that movement. Perhaps it's because our sensory systems work really closely together. I can't remember if I said this. So our proprioceptive and our vestibular system are working very closely together. So if you've got a child that can't sit still, offering a wobble cushion for them to sit on, that then they'll be able to move and they'll be able to generate that feedback that the body is seeking. So again, this is not them being
Okay.
difficult, they're not being awkward because they just can't sit still. That's not the case. It's that their body is seeking something. And in that instance, it's feedback through movement. So something as
Hmm.
simple or seemingly simple as a wobble cushion or a gym ball, they're very inexpensive. I know this is a bit of a taboo within school because there's a fear of um, will they mess about with it? There's lots of other children in the classroom, which I guess is why,
Yeah.
again, I'm an advocate for if it's going to help one child, it could possibly help all the children. So, having wobble cushions accessible for anybody that might be having a bit of a wobble in that morning. Perhaps they've had a rough morning, the parents might have been really busy, or they might have had a little bit of a falling out with their friend, or they might be feeling quite anxious themselves and so would perhaps benefit from having some movement. Having wobble cushions
Yeah.
accessible for everybody is going to be a benefit, and also it takes away some of
Hmm.
that taboo that that child, they're segregated, they're separate, that's for them, that's what they need. But surely, if it's something that can be accessible for all children, it helps with that support and understanding from a very early age. Um,
Yeah.
so I would definitely say modifying the environment. So seating, visual clutter as well. Like we're getting better at this in schools and nurseries where we're not plastered with notice boards that are full of colour and vibrancy and so everything's
Yeah.
there, it's bright, everything's in your face. Actually, schools are doing better, I must admit this, at having things that are more calm and more natural. Because again, that can help with that overstimulation. Um, at home, I would absolutely encourage for maybe quiet times if you can factor that into the day. So if you know that your child's going to have been at school all day, maybe having the opportunity to have a bit of time out when they first come home, just to help relax that sensory system. Having
Hmm.
visual schedules, and this goes across at home and at school, always having visual schedules. And I think even into teenage and adulthood, I think having a visual schedule can be beneficial, because actually, if we're feeling a bit wobbly, or we're feeling a little bit maybe tired, or we've had a rough few days, just being able to look at a visual schedule can be less taxing. So I don't think, again,
Yeah.
that should be something that's just for children. Obviously, the design might be a little bit more grown up when they get into the teenage years, but I think visual schedules can benefit us all.
Yeah.
Having fidget toys, stress balls, movement breaks, sensory breaks. Again, this is something that can be quite challenging to explain the benefits. When you're a teacher of a class of 30, it can feel really scary, the thought of, okay, we've got so much content to get through and we haven't got time to do that. But the benefit of having that 2 minute for everybody, everybody do a 2 minute in between a transition task, have a bit of a movement break to then be able to re-engage and focus. It can take the children from maybe the bottom rung where they're feeling sluggish and unstimulated. Having a bit of a movement break, just 2 minutes, will then possibly take them to the middle rung, where they're then in that
Yeah.
optimum learning zone again, and ready for the next task.
Yeah.
Predictable routines, like I've spoken about, having that visual schedule.
Yeah.
Teachers have to be, same as parents, they have to be a bit of detectives, actually, to see, if a child's presenting in a certain way with a certain behaviour, what has happened, where has this come
Mm.
from, and I guess that feeds back into that knowledge and understanding.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is understanding, isn't it? And it's, we can put lots of things in place to support children, but one of the key things to do is actually asking, if they're old enough, asking the children and saying, what is it that they need? Do they know what they need? And being able to adapt the environment to fit that child, rather than having to try and think of things that can be across the board for everyone, which are really useful to know and understand. But there is that element of knowing your own child as well, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to be an advocate for our children, when we're thinking about as parents. And again, it can feel like you've got one battle after another, but we do have to be that consistent advocate. And I guess teaching our children about sensory processing to empower them.
Yeah.
That's one of the
Yeah.
biggest things I think that we can do, is to empower our children, our teenagers, our adults. With knowledge and understanding, so they can learn more about themselves. Because how freeing is that if they really understand that, actually, I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling because perhaps the lights have been too bright, or perhaps the environment has been far too busy today, and that's having an impact.
Mm.
So it's just the way that our brain has processed that sensory information. How freeing is that feeling? And hopefully that will then ease some anxieties around, um, when we are in that sensory overload stage and we can feel really anxious. Actually, if we've got an understanding, it doesn't always work, because sometimes we're just in that anxiety state and we're just there. But actually, if
Mm.
we can teach children from a very young age about sensory processing, then hopefully the logic will kick in to help ease some of that anxiety.
Mm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we've spoken a few times about kind of the importance of knowledge and knowing, what the research says and things like that. So I want to talk a bit about research informed practice and, why this is so important in education. Are you able to talk a bit about what that term means and why that's important to have?
Yeah, absolutely. So research informed practice basically means making decisions based on good research. So I'd always encourage it to be, um, good, accurate research, potentially peer reviewed if we can. Um, and how that then, combined with own experiences, impacts a person or the situation. So I'm lucky enough to teach on the academic and professional practice module, with my early years and primary trainee teachers. And I love this module, because it's where I'm constantly saying to my students, this is where the theory meets the practice. So you're going to learn about all the things, the reasons why you're already doing what you're doing in practice. especially
Yeah.
the more mature students that have perhaps been in their working environment for a long time. They'll be doing things, and they might not necessarily know the theory about the reasons why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I love that moment where that light bulb happens and the two come together, and it's like, oh, that's the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. I love that
Yeah.
moment because it's really empowering for our students that they're doing things that are good or effective, but there is theory behind the reasons why. There is, evidence-based research to suggest that that's a
Mhm.
good way. The other thing I think is really important that we do keep up to date with research, because we know that new research is coming about all the time, and so that's
Yeah.
important that we do look to see how relevant, how recent um, it is, to then inform our practice. And it helps us to not become stagnant in what we're doing. You know, that term, this
Yeah.
is what I've always done, so I'm always going to do it. That's terrible saying, because actually things move constantly. New research, new evidence is coming to light all the time. And why not embrace that and, use that for our own development, to become better, to grow, to learn more? It's I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And obviously, research is very close to my heart and drives everything that I do with recaps. So I am completely on board with everything that you've said. And I think it's so important to not just get that research out there to inform the practice that's happening on the ground, but also like what I'm trying to do is simplify it, remove the jargon and get it in front of everybody so that everyone can make those informed decisions, whether that's in the classroom as a teacher or at home as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a wonderful thing you're doing.
Thank you. That's really kind. So what inspired you to write a children's book? Tell me about your children's book, The Sensory Experiences. This sounds amazing.
Oh, thank you. Well, it came about because I'd written a book for early years educators, and that came about because I really wanted to. It goes back to, I guess, empowering them with knowledge and understanding, and again thinking about that fluid motion, that when our children go to nursery, to preschool, wherever it is that they're going in those early years, um, it's really important that educators have got an understanding about sensory processing and how to support behaviour, the importance of like sensory play, and all the things that are
Yeah.
sensory processing difficulties and what that might look like. Because also we know that early intervention, if there are any sensory processing difficulties that need more tailored support. So I'm talking about sensory processing sort of in that overarching, generalised for everybody, but occupational therapists will work more with students that are more one-to-one, for that tailored support. And I should add, anybody
Yeah.
that feels that they need support or help with their sensory processing, please do reach out to an occupational therapist. They're the professionals that you need to speak to, that will be able to work one-to-one and give more tailored support. So the things that I've suggested are obviously in that generalised, overarching. But anybody that
Yeah.
feels like they need more tailored support, please do reach out to an occupational therapist. So after I'd written that for early years educators, I was speaking to my daughter, and she said, oh, you should do one for children. And I thought, why didn't I think of that? What a fantastic idea. I'm here trying to advocate for children and for teenagers, for adults, so that it can have a lasting impact. And actually, the
Yeah.
people that I should be targeting, if I want to go, really young, is the children themselves. And it's just
Yeah.
a really simple book there isn't a lot of imagery on there, there's hardly any words, and I just go through some different scenarios that they might experience in a school day that might impact on their sensory systems. And the idea is that it empowers them with some understanding of why they might be feeling like they're feeling, because it's not a nice feeling. I mean, Lucy, if you felt anxious, like, it's a horrible feeling to sit with. And if
Yeah.
it's something that they're experiencing, again, if they've got an understanding of why they might be feeling like they're feeling, then that will take away that guilt feeling, that where they're being really hard on themselves. Oh, I shouldn't be feeling like this, or I shouldn't be doing this. Actually, it's not your fault that you're feeling like you are. It's not your fault
Yeah.
that you're in that overwhelm. It's actually could possibly be a reaction to the environment or to something that's happened in the day. So it's really
Mm.
written for children to empower them with a little bit of knowledge and understanding about possibly why they're feeling the way they're feeling.
Amazing. And is it available for people to buy? Where can people
Yeah,
find it?
absolutely. So all of the three of the books that I've written are all available on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah, so anybody that works with children, I would, encourage you to maybe have a little bit of a read and see if it's something that you think would work in your setting. But yeah, it's really written with children in mind, and even before they can even read, there's pictures in there that they can sort of have a look at and just see. Because I think the earlier on that we can introduce and teach about our sensory systems, then it's just going to be something that's the norm. It's just something that they learn
Yeah,
about, that
completely agree. Yeah.
it's something that's not new, or something that is a taboo subject even.
Mhm.
And also, I'd love it to be accessible for everybody, because even children that potentially haven't got sensory processing difficulties, for them to be able to pick it up and understand why their friend might be feeling really
Yeah.
cross, that seemingly again out of nowhere, and then might punch them in the arm, and that feels really unfair. Why have they done that? Actually, if we're teaching all children about sensory processing, potentially they've had a little read of the book, then it might not that that behaviour is okay, but it might be a little bit more. It might create a little bit more understanding as to why that's happened, or why they've done what they've done. And I would always encourage
Yeah.
them to have that conversation and talk through what's happened, and maybe allow for an opportunity to apologise, or however that situation is dealt with. But it does create some understanding, which I think is really important, because behaviour, like I said earlier, it doesn't come from nowhere. It always comes from somewhere.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's so important. And do you know what? It's funny because the last few weeks I've spoken to a number of different people now, um, who have told me about various things that they're doing, and this element of not just doing support for the individuals experiencing something, but for those around them as well. So, like what you've just said about actually children who don't necessarily have sensory processing challenges, but for them to understand why other people might be reacting in the way that they are, and have that kind of knowledge behind other people's experiences. And I think that's so important, and something that has been missing for a long time in lots of different situations. So I'm so happy that I'm hearing this more and more now, that people are branching out and actually including people, teaching children who are neurotypical about neurodivergence, so they can understand the children around them and why they might behave or speak in a certain way or experience the world in a different way. So I love that you've said that, because that's so, so important that we're doing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's been an emphasis on understanding autism and the person themselves understanding it, which is absolutely important. But like you were
Yeah.
just saying,
Yeah.
actually, we do need to be speaking to everybody, to their peers, because there does need to be that understanding there. Um, because actually, if our children, as they get older, they are really struggling in that schooling environment. Imagine that their peers, they actually understand somewhat about sensory processing, or the fact that they're neurodivergent. The shift then that goes from maybe frustration and anger that they've lashed out, to actually, I'm here for you. It seems like you're having
Yeah.
a really tough time. You're on the top rung of that ladder. Do you want to go for a walk? Shall we go get some fresh air outside? Shall we splash some cold water on your face? What can I do to help you to to calm down and become on that middle rung of the ladder? What can I do to help you? The difference that has on everybody's experience, not just the person that's going through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could talk to you about it for a long time, Lucy. It's something that I'm very passionate about.
No, no, I can sense that, and I love it. We can't talk about books without talking about your recently released brand new book as well, Finding Balance, Sensory Overload, Anxiety, and Your Well-being, which I have had the pleasure to read myself, and it was fantastic. And do you know what? It was lovely to read it because it really made me think about myself. For anyone listening who isn't aware, I found out that I am autistic. Last year, I got my diagnosis, and I have been on a bit of a journey myself in finding out the whys and what fors for lots of my different experiences and things like that. And sensory has been one of those. And reading your book really highlighted to me. I had lots of those moments where I was like, oh, it's like that because of that, and it really piqued my interest in lots of different areas. So just for anyone out there listening who might be interested in reading it, what is it about and who would benefit from reading your latest book?
Oh, Lucy, thank you so much for sharing that. That honestly, that really means a lot. So it came about because Ashton had a really tough transition from when he left GCSEs at 16. Um, and it really impacted on his mental health, and he was really anxious, and lots of things that in life really that he was struggling with. And so I thought, I need to do something more than having these conversations. I need something practical. And so I'd started to
Mm.
write this workbook, thinking that it was just going to be something that me and him could do together. We'd do regular little sessions that were going to, in my mind, hopefully help. And it just grew and grew and grew and grew until it got to the point where I was like, oh wow, it's ended up being a workbook.
It's another book.
Yeah, and it's something that, again, I'm really passionate about, and it's been written with lots of different things in mind. So ultimately, it's to help with anxiety. But like I mentioned earlier, our lives aren't like, our home life isn't just home life, our work life isn't just work life. And so I cover different areas that we possibly will experience in our day, to hopefully help and support those that maybe are struggling with anxiety through sensory processing difficulties, or the impact of sensory processing. Now, like I mentioned earlier, our sensory systems are impacted by trauma. So if somebody's been through a traumatic experience and they're finding that actually they might feel more sensitive, more anxious than they typically were before, it could be that they might benefit from going through the workbook. It isn't something that I would expect that somebody would pick up and read from cover to cover. It is designed to be sort of a workbook that can be used practically. So maybe
Mhm.
you're having a bit of a tough time at work. I know for me, when I'm at work, if I'm doing some marking or I really need to concentrate, I've got to be in an environment where there's no distractions. you know,
Yeah.
and I'm in a position where I've got a lovely team that I work with and a supportive manager, and so I can sort of say, right, I'm either taking my headphones in, my noise cancelling headphones, or I can work from home. And then not everybody's got that, they're not in that position, they haven't got that option. And so in the book I sort of go through some suggestions maybe of how you can advocate for yourself within a working environment, because again, if you're doing things consistently throughout the day to help to support your sensory systems, the idea is that then it will help reduce that sensory overload, that anxious feeling, keep
Yeah.
you on the middle rung of the ladder. It's quite practical. At the end of each chapter I've put in there some practical things that you can do. Again, it's
Yep.
there's things in there hopefully to help us understand our own sensory systems, because again, that could be an empowering thing. If we really do understand why we're feeling the way we're feeling, it can be an empowering thing. I talk a little bit about
Mm.
diet in there and the impact of food, sleep. That's obviously a massive thing. That can impact on our everyday lives. So really, in short, anybody that's perhaps experiencing anxiety and needs a practical workbook to help to work through that, then hopefully it's something that might be user friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my experience, it was really lovely to sit and read through something and have the opportunity to reflect at regular intervals throughout. So, like you say, there are options at kind of the end of the chapter or what have you to pose some questions, make you think, make you kind of stop and reflect, which was really good. And I learned something new about myself, which is something that I think I've always known, but I didn't join the dots. And I'm very much, I'm a pressure seeker. Like I love pressure. I like really hard hugs. I like to be wrapped in blankets. I like to feel really kind of secure and tight. And it was really funny because I was driving the other day and I noticed that in as I'm driving the car, I've got like an armrest that you can lift up and put down. And if the armrest is up, and I obviously then have more space in my chair, I feel unsettled. But if I put the armrest down and it almost like locks me into my chair and closes me in, I feel happier when I'm driving because I feel like I'm closed in. And I assume that's to do with that sense where I like to feel closed in and pressured and kind of wrapped up. I don't like the feeling of being free, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And I'm absolutely delighted. I'm over the moon to hear that, because what a wonderful story that you've just shared, experience that you've just shared, because that demonstrates that you're understanding your own sensory profile, and you could do that. You could move the armrest down so you felt secure and you felt,
Mm,
better in your driving, and you could advocate for yourself. And I just love that you shared that. And it absolutely can be a sensory thing, and it can do with our proprioceptive system, knowing where we are in
mm,
space. Obviously there's deeper science to it than that, but on
yeah,
the very surface level. So I just love that you've shared that, because actually, that demonstrates that you've learned some more about yourself, I guess, and your own sensory system. So then, if maybe in the future you are feeling a little bit anxious, you could maybe think, actually, is it because I'm in, an open space? Do I need to feel more
yeah,
secure, more closed in, especially if it's perhaps something that
yeah.
you're doing something that you need to concentrate on? But thank you for sharing that.
No, not at all. I think it's been really nice to kind of join the dots. And like, as I said earlier in our conversation, like my spatial awareness isn't always great. I walk into things all the time. I'm covered in bruises because I don't judge space very well. I feel nervous when I'm driving because of a kind of a spatial element to it. So I think that it all started to kind of make sense that around that particular sense, I obviously have some challenges. And I'm actually looking at getting a weighted blanket because I think it's going to help me sleep better because I'll be even more wrapped up than I already am in my duvet.
Yeah, absolutely. And think with our proprioceptive system, if our bodies doesn't really know what it's doing, it's a very anxiety provoking thing. And so actually a weighted blanket or deep compression clothing or item sends that signal to your brain, that reassuring signal to your brain to say, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm okay. And it's through our
Okay.
muscles that that signal is being sent. So out of caution with the weighted blanket, just check the weight. So just do your weight and obviously the weighted blanket. But if you like tight hugs and you like deep pressure, then a weighted blanket is a wonderful tool for giving feedback. We have one in our house. I sometimes have it on me if I'm feeling quite anxious, and I really like it. My daughter, she's had it quite a few nights. She's had a few wobbles over the last few weeks, and she does struggle with sleep anyway. And so that's
Yeah.
something that actually is quite reassuring. Um, it, your brain's very clever, so it's at the most effective for about the first 20 minutes. Your brain can be tricked. Then after about 20 minutes, your brain sort of starts to cotton on, and it sort of starts to say, hang on a minute, I'm not being tricked anymore. But then having a break from it for about an hour and then putting it back on again you can trick your brain back into
Okay.
to that, where it sends that signal again, that reassuring signal to say, yeah, I'm safe, I'm okay, everything's all right, and to start to ease that anxious feeling.
Interesting. That's a great tip. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So, in your role as a curriculum leader, how do you embed that inclusive and neurodiversity aware practice into like higher education, for instance?
Oh, brilliant question. So I've been with the university that I'm with now for nearly 4 years, and it's only recently that I've taken on this role as curriculum leader. So I'm in the early years and education team, and then I've just taken on this role for the adult care. And I guess that I've been in a lucky position because of my mixed background, I guess. But something that I've tried really hard to do throughout, so before I took on this new role, throughout starting, is raise awareness. So I do quite a lot of sensory processing workshops, and that can be through,
Okay.
my students, through discovery days. So, other students that are coming in that maybe aren't students of ourselves. And it's quite a hands-on workshop where I get them involved. And again, that's to really try and raise awareness. So probably one of the biggest things I do is I'm constantly talking about sensory processing, and wherever I can, I offer these workshops. The other things that I guess that I do, the everyday things, is offer alternative communication options. Not everybody likes to be verbal in what they're saying. Some people prefer to have a little bit of time to respond, so they need to have a little bit of thinking
Hmm.
time. So offering alternative communication. We are again in the lucky position that our class sizes are a lot smaller, so that does tend to help with that overwhelm. We have the lights off sometimes. Some of our students will say, "Oh no," because they're those fluorescent, horrible lights, and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
and that's absolutely okay. We have the lights off. They can wear earplugs if they need to help with that auditory processing, and we have regular movement and sensory breaks. Again, I guess I'm in a lucky position where I'm with adult learners and they can advocate for themselves a lot of the time. I say, don't ask if you need to go, if you need a movement break or you
yeah.
need to process, please just go. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and I guess the biggest thing is like the reach, the getting the word out there, understanding about sensory processing, so that then because of who I work with, so they're early years educators and trainee teachers, their reach is going to be far greater than my reach, in that every one of those students is then going to be going back to classes of possibly 30 children. So if I can educate and I can advocate for sensory processing to them and help them to really embed that knowledge, they're then going to go back to their respective classes and take that
Yeah.
information and that knowledge with them. They're going to be the
Hmm.
detectives of their own class, of working with their children. And so from me sharing that with my small group, it widens that knowledge and
Yeah,
understanding
that
through
impact.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the experts with their classes. They know their children. If their children are
Hmm.
accessing health services, if perhaps they are seeing an occupational therapist, they'll see them once every now and then. Whereas the teachers are with the children day in, day out. They're there. They'll know their children, and so really, them and their parents and caregivers, they're the key people that we need to help understand about this, because um, those environments, those transitions, like I was saying earlier, if we can support with those transitions, hopefully, and that
Mm.
knowledge and understanding, hopefully we'll see happier, more contented children. That's the ideal.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
So, what would you say to parents and educators who are just beginning to explore sensory processing?
Don't stop. Keep going. There's so much to learn and grow and learn about. So I would say start small, start with, the basic understanding. I've really briefly mentioned it today. Start small and then just read. Try things out, see the difference that it can make with your children. Now, one day you might try something and it might seem to work perfectly, and then another day it might seem to have not an impact at all. But don't lose hope, don't give up, keep going. That's because possibly the sensory system is processing that information slightly differently. Maybe they're
Mm.
halfway up the ladder one time, or maybe they're right at the top of the rung of the ladder another time, and so the impact is going to be different. So don't lose hope.
Mm.
To parents, I would absolutely say, I understand. I know how hard and challenging it can be. There are places that can support. There are parent forums out there that can offer help and advice and support. You're not in this on your own. There are people that are out there that absolutely can appreciate and understand what you're going through. And um, I guess my biggest encouragement would be to go out there and find people that you can relate to, that you feel understand you and you understand them, because together as a team it can feel so much less isolating and lonely. Because if we think about, children going to even parties, a child that seemed to be, having behaviour difficulties in the class, they don't always get invited to the parties, or the child that's gotten forgotten about doesn't always get invited to the parties,
Yeah.
and that can impact on the parents as well, on those playground
Mm.
friendship groups. And so actually it can be quite a lonely feeling, but you don't have to feel alone. You don't have to feel lonely. There are absolutely groups, charity organisations, parent forums out there that you can access and that will be really supportive and hopefully helpful. So I'd encourage you to access those services.
Amazing. Sarah, that's been so, so useful and insightful for all the things that you've shared today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put links to your books underneath the episode so that people can see where to access them, have a look, see if it's something that they want to purchase as well. So that would be great to put those in there so it's easier for people to find. But thank you so
Oh, that's
much for your time
amazing.
today.
Lucy, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. Any opportunity to talk all things sensory processing. But honestly, thank you so much for inviting me to come on today. I've loved it.
Not at all. It's and I can feel the passion and the excitement and the determination behind your voice of wanting to get this out there in front of people. And I'm really honoured that I'll be able to provide a platform where that will happen and that will get in front of a few more people, which is fantastic. I think the work that you're doing is amazing. And I have definitely learned a lot through our discussion today and also through reading your book. So thank you for sharing your expertise and getting it out there in front of people. It's amazing.
Oh, Lucy, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you. Take care.
You too. Bye.